Thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the invitation. Thank you, Matthias, and Hannah for sharing your time with me. I am very pleased to be here with you tonight. Um, Indeed, the topic of obesity is a topic I have worked on and studied and observed and for many years. I started looking into it in the late 2006 in Hawaii, actually, because let's see if it goes, okay. Um, because my interest started when I was actually carrying out the first field work I ever carried out, which was my master's degree's field work in Hawaii. Um, and I worked with the native Hawaiian population on the Waianae coast. And interestingly enough, the matter and the issue of body, of a body talking back, of a body um, which would mark an identity was quite clear. In Hawaii, I often received this answer, of course I am big, I am Hawaiian, as a way of distinguish themselves also physically from the colonial American powers. It is there in Hawaii that my interest in Tonga started, thanks to a colleague, Heather Young Leslie, who at the time was actually teaching at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and who invited me to extend my interest further on in the Pacific. And for that reason, since my PhD, I started dedicating time to this issue, which of course grew. In which sense it grew? It extended. I started looking into the body, and then I realized I couldn't look into the body without thinking and looking into health, without looking into the food, the eating patterns, the eating habits. And then from food, it somehow continuates within the issue of food security, food sovereignty, and food activism, which is what I am more looking into right now, especially with my last writings on gastro-colonialism. I wasn't sure how the audience was knowledgeable on Oceania. Certainly, I am speaking to people who are part of the society of the are part or will be part of the Viennese South Pacific Society, Studies for South Pacific, and therefore, I am sure I don't need to go through all this literature. But it was important to me to kind of underline and stress this this idea of unity in diversity. The fact that I worked in a context, as the Tongan context, very specific, but at the same time, you will probably find some connections with the context of Oceania that you know, because we're talking about a sea of islands, because we're talking about a concept that I really like and use as the concept of islandness, as Godfrey Baldacchino puts it, because I worked on a territory which should probably be called a hydrography more than a geography, because it's 90% water more than land, where farmers are farmers of gardens made of land and made of water, where the sea is within the society, and where the thinking of this island, of this island condition of being an island, it means that the limits are never reached. The beach, the mountain, the coral reef are the limits, Emanuela Borgnino tells us, but at the same time, they are the possibility. So I have worked in a context that for this main reasons, for this islandness as a relevant variable, probably talks to all the contexts where you also have carried out research. Let me just mention how here there's a map of the southern island where I worked. In a second, I will show you a bigger map. It's the island of Tongatapu, so where the capital Nuku'alofa is. Well, in the local ontologies, people, as I was mentioned, not only are at home with the sea, but they are. There is a principle of continuity between human and non-human entities, and the social organization is conceived as a vast kinship network. In this kinship network, as Tupuatamasese Taisi Efi puts it, animal, plants, humans, rivers and seas and rocks and atmospheric agents are divided into giant kin groups with whom we as humans share the same origin. But we are the last arrived. We are the very last. Humans settled the islands in a context that already had its biota, already had its relationships. In this sense, as very beautifully Leach puts it, geography is kinship or landscape. So islanders of the Pacific indeed need to belong, or do belong, we should probably rather reframe, to places, to plots, to taro patches, to coconut groves, to sandy beaches, to parts of the reef and islands more in general. If there's a common feared notion, is that of loss, of being out of place, unable of creating a connection with place. But today we're talking about food, and this connection with place, in my experience, is very much entailed in food. Because food, as Emmanuel Casarero puts it, who is not Tongan, but here I am trying to stretch to all Oceania this importance of the connection with the land, and in particular the food. Food is what connects to the fonua, where the land, or the onua, namely the land and the water around it, and to the ancestors that have preceded us. And this is very clear if we, for example, look at the oral tradition of the settlement of the Kingdom of Tonga. The oral tradition use an epithet, epiteto is in Italiano, I think in English is epithet. Just like, I don't know, Homer used in the Odyssey, Athena, blue eye, Achille, fast foot, Achille più veloce, Athena occhio azzurro. Well, this epithet were used in the local oral history of the first settlers as a phenomenon passing from being Kaimoana, eaters of the water, to Kaifonua, eaters of the land. So the first settlers ate water on canoes, and when they settled, they started eating the land, cultivating the land, accessing the land. In this, let's say, cultural context, the Kingdom of Tonga, an archipelago, far from being vulnerable, is made strong from its logics of archipelago, or archipelagics, as some colleagues have put it, Adriano Favole, Lara Giordana, for example. And it's a context spread and stretched in miles of water, The residents count approximately 100,000, but the diaspora of Tongans is way bigger. We're talking about 300,000 people, Tongans, living outside of Tonga. For this reason, we used the word diaspora. Another way to say that my field, despite being in Tonga, has always been further away, wider, because the field goes beyond the local. It goes and it follows the relationships with the islanders that are gone, but still stay and still have connections with the island. Divided in three regions. The northern ones are the newest are actually closer to Samoa, but still in the political waters of Tonga. It is a constitutional monarchy. It passed from being as many islands in Polynesia, chieftaincies, to unified kingdom. And interestingly enough, it was never colonized by colonial rule, as, for example, the near neighbor Fiji. Despite being the presence of the missionaries, probably assimilabili, despite the missionaries were present, and probably we could say another different colonization. 95% of the population is Tongan, and about 70% of them, of the gross domestic product, is made by remittances. It's considered a subsistence economy, namely, every young male above 16, when he turns 16, is given a piece and a plot of land by the state to cultivate, and another one to build a house. So every family has land. Land in Tonga is inalienable as constitutional right. Which are the elements of anthropological interest that moved my research? Well, the fact that in 2006 the WHO has published a report, very alarmistic, saying that it was occurring an obesity epidemic in Oceania, which, if you think about it, is already interesting as a concept, because how can obesity, which is not a viral disease, be an epidemic? Clearly, they were talking about great numbers. Tonga was fifth, 80 with percentages absolutely enormous. 87% of men, 94% of women, overweight or obese. Two conditions very different, but they were put together in this report. I thought it was interesting the fact that the higher percentage was among women. It was interesting. These are somehow the elements that I had at the beginning of this research, that there was the present, given the inalienability of the land, no fast food chain was present, because they do buy land, they do buy the walls. And so when actually McDonald's arrived in Tonga, they said, "We're not selling your land, I'm sorry." And so they left and they never opened. And this occurred with all the fast food chains. There was an interesting anthropological literature as well on some so-called fattening rituals, mainly among women who had just given birth. And in general, a wider literature. First of all, I'm thinking about Nancy Pollock, for example, well-known Nancy Pollock, discussing and debating a Polynesian context in which food was definitely central to social practices. The narration of the newspaper, of the press, was that of a paradise that was actually becoming hell, because as the same old rhetoric of these islands of paradise, which now are so obese that they are sinking from the weight of their people. who clearly look in magazines such as Island Business, lazy, in a very same old colonial reiteration of perception, eating themselves to death. What is the solution that the press I have analyzed in the years still did and still does, I must say, unfortunately, propose? To change culture, because the problem is culture. Well, I thought this was very interesting to start with as an anthropologist. But soon, my question from is Tonga in the middle of an obesity epidemic? Why is Tonga in the middle of an obesity epidemic? Soon this question became, is Tonga really in the middle of an obesity epidemic? I tried to look into the preferences, the habits, and the eating patterns, the preparation, the consumption practices of the Tongan population within its historical dynamism. So interviewing different generations and see what had changed. I looked into the symbolic values of food and their connections with the social order, but mainly situated the food in a wider analysis. As I was mentioning before, you can't talk about food without looking into the body, the beauty ideals. You can't talk about food without looking into health. And it's what I will try to summarize today, I hope, with success. But let me mention one thing that I think it's important to mention before: the fact that there was a big change in Tonga in the social, political, and I would say cosmogonic order in the passage from chieftaincies to let's say the current system. As I mentioned, it is a kingdom. It was eased by Christianity. If the previous system was based on the mana tapu eiki system, which was a way of organizing in space, roles, and resources, and it was certainly a way of controlling the population. Based on mana, we all know what mana is. I just put a list behind for those who are not that familiar with mana, which I believe it's not the case of this audience. But the point is that everyone was a mana carrier, but the chiefs were divine mana. They inherited mana. They were the ones who would access specific resources and put tapu on them. So this system related this sacred power with the safeguarding of resources and edible resources as well. And so it was a way of safeguarding the authority of chiefs in guaranteeing their decision-making process over the kainga, the extended family. This system guaranteed the hegemony of those of the eiki, so the higher ranks of the populations, the chiefs, and the subalternity of the tu'a, the common population. But deaths and newborns made the system very dynamic. Let me explain this a little better. I think it is important in this sense to mention this. Each Tongan still is eiki, so is chiefly to someone, and is tu'a to someone else, both for males and females. Of course, we're talking about the Hawaiian genealogical system. So what determines is the relationship. Sisters are eiki to brothers, husbands are eiki to wives, and elders are eiki to youth. But then, for example, So therefore, wives are two husbands, but they're not. But the brothers are two sisters. Okay, so there is some kind of profound equilibrium between powers. This system was very much how can I say broken, and it changed completely with Christianity, um, who revised the concepts. So tapu became sacred, synonym of sacred. Mana, it was emptied by its magical and physical realm. And eiki was transposed in the Western social class logic. Why am I saying this? Because also the conception of space changed. If before it was organized in concentric circles and it had some figures, as for example, the tahui fonua that you see in the third circle of the kainga of the extended family, who was the person in charge of taking care of the land, of taking the decisions of what communities would eat in an equilibrium and balance of resources, fell apart. And this conception became completely radical changed. It was changed completely into a more Western pyramidal conception where the common population is at the bottom, the nobles, nopele, they didn't have a name for that, were made made nobles, some of the chiefs who decided to unify, to be part of the unification of the kingdom under one chief only, became nobles, and the eiki, the royal family. I am saying this because it is important to keep it in mind when we talk about food, and we will get there. When I arrived in Tonga, this is the bodyscape I witnessed. It was really hard to find visibly obese bodies. And I started wondering how was back in the days. And I started digging in history, looking into the first designs, first pictures, first drawings, looking into diaries of the first Europeans who arrived and get in contact with Captain Cooks, for example. And the general, they all agreed on the fact that everybody, including women, were muscular and strong. And the chiefs, in particular, were very tall and stout and pale. If we take these first photographs and we put them close to how the current Tongan women are, I wouldn't see any difference, physical difference. But it's interesting how the second time I went back after flying away for a few months and getting back, the first thing I was told is, "Oh, you grew fat, you look good." And so which I didn't, by the way, but I thought it was really interesting because it really, really it really meant how abundance was a value, bigness, a symbol of wealth, of beauty, of well-being, of power, of high social status. Just the opposite of skin uh, of being skinny, which is a lack of all this. Chiefs were big and pale, indeed, and so maybe what if, I wondered, with a greater access to resources that occurred in time, this population, the population could actually reach this beauty and body ideals? What if it is not occurring an obesity epidemic, but it is occurring a democratization of big body sizes? Because there is a connection between the physical weight and the social weight of the people. There is a balance. If I have pages and pages and pages of interviews, transcriptions of interviews with sentence as Tongans are big people, we're physically big. People refers us to Polynesians as mentioning our big thighs. And stories of caring, of having big bodies because they are mana carriers. So I started looking into thresholds. And I think probably this quote is what best describes the question of thresholds. My mom has always told me that beauty was to be big and healthy. But the main point is to define the term big. You can be big and obese, big and firm, big and thin. Indeed, bigness is not fatness. And there are thresholds, there are differences. I had the chance living there to look into to dive into and make an ethnography of the beauty pageant Miss Heilala. I won't stay long on this. I just want to argue and say that when I started asking about beauty, I got it wrong because I always get answers that were not entailing the body. I was asking, what is beauty for you? Elegance, respecting the rules, um, walking on the street in a certain way, dressing in a certain way. But the body was never mentioned. When I started introducing the word sino, body, I got answers that were very precise. This is just a section of what the choreographer of the king told me of how a beautiful body should be. Harmonious, beautiful eyes as of a precise shape named Kanivatu. The face is to be beautiful as the native flower of Ewa Island that doesn't exist anymore, called Mohavao, which literally means to sleep in the forest. The waist should be in a certain way, and I won't continue, but extremely defined in every component. So I found out that somehow there are beauty ideals living aside. One is the Sino Lele, a beautiful body, which is a body that, according to the new generations, is thinner. And there's a Sino Fakatonga, which is the Tongan, the perfect Tongan body, which is recognized as the beautiful Tongan body, the only body you can dance traditional dances with. But it is not the ideal body of the new generations anymore. It is bigger. In this sense, there is a local biology we have to talk about, and we get into this idea also into another step, let's say step forward. This idea that oh sorry of a local biology, of a cultural biology, of the fact that culture and biology mix, of a body that is not that is built is there's like a like an anthropopoiesis, we would say, so a construction that is also physical on a body that already has some physical characteristics. And I find this very interesting when they say we culturally tend to bigness. If we look at this image, which is very simple, it tells us something. It tells us that these two men who have the same height and weight do have the same body mass index. How was this epidemic of obesity calculated? Through the body mass index. And this explains us a lot. The formula is very, and because these two bodies are clearly very different. In a context like Tonga, where male young guys do practice a lot of rugby, the body would rather switch and be more close to the figure on the left of the screen rather than on the right, to a point where, imagine, the National Nutritional Survey had to exclude the skin fold measurement. You might be not familiar with this, which is that of the fat, basically. It's like a clip that clips you the belly. They had to exclude it because of the good muscular development. No bellies, no fat. And obviously, part of my ethnography included clearly the third times of the rugby games, where I had the chance to stay and interview rugby players as well. And they would argue, saying, this BMI makes no sense for me. I'm a Pacific Islander, I'm big, I have played rugby all my life, and now they tell me they're obese, I'm obese. And this other says, Well, they tell me I should be 90, I should be 87 kilos. My God, have, oh my God, have you ever seen me at 90? Everybody was asking me what was wrong because bigness is a value because, and we're not talking about fatness. So we really have to unpack this concept of bigness. What occurs certainly is that in the course of the life, with the passage of status, the body changes, and it does occur in embodiment of the social positions. These are nurses on the left side in blue, the young nurses on the right side. All these photographs are made by a dear friend of mine who passed away, unfortunately, in a terrible accident, whose name is Antonio Zambardino, and who stayed with me for a long time on the island and carried out and took this beautiful photos I'm still using many years after. And so this embodiment of the social position means that the society expects the body to change. Listen to the words of one of my interlocutors. I know this girl, very beautiful, who got married a while ago already, and she hasn't gained weight. You know, my mom and everybody thinks that she's selfish because she's thinking more about herself than her sons. So, if the identification of a bodily difference, as Paul Farmers puts it, happens in a context where bodies are different from a European standard and therefore removed from their agency, to recognize the bodily difference might be useful to reorganize the basis of the biomedical standardized indexes and global health planning. Here we are deconstructing. Are we talking about a medicalization of big body sizes? We probably are. Let's dive a little bit into food before talking about health. Many said exposing a big body is like exposing a big pile of root crops. Indeed, there is a straight connection between body and food, to a point where if I have to cheer a woman and say she has beautiful body or beautiful legs, I would say she has vae or esino kapapulu, namely tin meat, fat. On the opposite, saying that the legs of the body of a person are kapaika, tin fish, it means she's skinny, poor, and probably not loved by her family. We talked already about the centrality of food in the context of Polynesia. Let me just say, for example, the term kainga, extended family, is the contraction of kai anga and literally means the place where we eat together. It is a lubricant for social interaction. The foodscape in Tonga is indeed very hybrid. It's stratified. Given the fact that the land is inalienable, the diet is very much based still on root crops and local greens and local staples, but hybridized with tin meat, with tin fish, because fishing is unfortunately still quite considered poor and of a low social status. And these recipes are all hybridized. It's a hybridization with India, with China, with Palangi, namely with Western food. And the regime is a regime of one big meal a day. It's interesting how food marks time also, and it's divided in the same hierarchy I was mentioning before. So whatever you eat, it tells you in which situation you are: daily, ceremonial, festive. And of course, at the top, you would have yam and pigs, which are only ceremonially, would never eat outside of a ceremony. And at the very bottom, fish and sweet potatoes. I will go fast on this because I have little time. Important, I'd like to mention also the fact that there's big redistribution ceremonies as the church conferences, the Lotu Konifelenisi, where families work hard weeks and weeks to prepare this kaipola, these tables of food, where you actually can see, you find as much pigs as canned food, as imported food. Imported food which has no status, which is very versatile, which you would find everywhere. And Western vegetables, which are usually not useful We use lettuce, yes, for decoration. Um, and carrots, we put them on the table, but they don't have any social value. I could never show up at the wedding of my sister carrying a basket of carrots, so it is useless to cultivate them. Um, Let me quickly mention the fact that the Tongan foodscape, therefore, is a stratification of introductions and selections by the first settlers, the explorers, the missionaries. The missionaries, for example, introduced two different types of root crops, but also of food regimes. Despite the islands of Tonga, the archipelago of Tonga never being colonized, once arrived entered somehow in the post-war regime, as Plache and Ponaperuma puts it, they started receiving international guidelines on cultivations. And so since the 80s, they followed 20 years plans of cultivations of monocultures, bananas, melons, squash. And entering the WTO in 2007 meant free market, the entrance, well, exportation on taxes, and the entrance of um, canned, or sorry, of canned, oh, I have to go back, sorry, canned, frozen, packed food, which, as you can see, are part of the diet today. And under such, I would like to underline that under such free trade agreement, Tonga, as many other island states of Oceania, such as Fiji and Vanuatu, were unable to extract from local foods the replacements of the imports. For example, flour from dried root crops for substitution of wheat flour, because it lacks investment in processing and storage facilities. So a big dependence on importation. And also the soil very much impoverished, because the oldest system of agroforestry, of an interconnected arboreal factory, which was keeping the soil firm and fertile, was abandoned to the great expense of the local population and the local stability of let's say food security. I should. I'm sorry. I hope you still see me, but I'm not in my house and I am not sure where the light is. In a second, I will turn it. Oh, maybe I should turn it now, right? Sorry. Let's see. Okay. That's better, right? I was starting to become dark. So let me finish in this 7 minutes that I have left on my 45 timer, just addressing how in such a concept where food from elsewhere, food that usually is canned and processed, has come into the kingdom of Tonga, has hybridized with the local recipes, and it's now a component, and it's now daily, ceremonial, and festive food. What's the impact that has done on health and to the obesity issue? To wrap up, well, there's a very high percentage of people who have diabetes and non-communicable diseases, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, some kind of cancers, as the colon cancer, for example. If you have diabetes, is a silent, unfortunately, disease. Therefore, you don't really know you have it. You cut yourself, and imagine that for the whole time I was there, the first year, the entire what is it called? The reparto di chirurgia, the entire surgical ward was populated by people who had to undergo amputations of feet and legs. It seems has been a war, but there's no war. It's diabetes. Okay. Um, as a matter of fact, this high rates of non-communicable diseases are said to be the consequence of the weight of the body, of the fact that population is fat. Not because of the food and the kind of food the people have access to, and not to the quality of food, but namely, individuals are blamed. This poster that you see that clearly in red says the choice is yours. It doesn't take into consideration that the choice is never yours. The body is collective. The body talks about your community, and individual choices are very rare in a country as Tonga. So my argument is that we probably have to separate the weight of the body, which, as we saw, are bodies that not necessarily are unhealthy, are big bodies, but not obese bodies, anthropometrically big. There's lots of medical literature on the weight of the bones, on the weight that children have at birth, average weight 5 kilos, which is way higher than the Western, which is usually 3. Okay, so my argument is to separate the weight of the body from the onset of diseases and rather tie it to the diet, to the political choices of the country, to the political choices of the government, to the free market, to the aid economy on food matters. It is way easier to blame individuals and say they are too lazy to eat well. It is a way more complex issue. I did look into health. I thought it was very important to look into how the public health campaigns are thought, and I realized how the health promotion is made around a term that has to be invented. Mo'uilele, literally live well. It had to be invent this term because locally being healthy is the combination of generosity, respect of social obligation, care for social relationship, obedience, but also body. It's also a physical, a strong body, an appetite, and eating freely characterizes a body, a healthy body. So I wondered, and I am quite sure about this last findings, that what has occurred is rather a medicalization of big body sizes. It is important to look what kind of life bodies have accustomed to live. I won't go through the healing paths in the specifically and all the difference between the medical system. Let me just say that there is a coexistence between biomedicine, Tongan medicine, also said traditional healing, and the church ministers. And probably what's more interesting in this sense is the fact that all the church ministers, the healing ministers that I have interviewed, tell me that many people are going to them to be cured. They have diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. They come to visit me, says one, instead of going to the doctor, because the Bible says you can be cured in the name of God. It is a very powerful name, that of God. People don't go to the hospital because of difficulties with the language, with English, with medical terminology, with the fact that often doctors are men and women do not want to expose their bodies. And there's a big issue, or there was a big issue going on when I was actually discussing this with the nutritionist, that people would go to the hospital and bring food. And so the hospital tried to convince the relatives to actually bring flowers, but they said it's a Palangi thing. We want to bring chicken and show our affection and respect. So let me just conclude with this couple of posters, which tells us a story that is, I think, a story of misjudgment um, and I could say culturally incompetent way of looking at the Tongan context. This first poster is that wondering and saying, so if you had have you had your breakfast? And so this public health policies and campaigns are trying to, just like the missionaries tried back in the days, to educate to 3 meals a day regime as a regime that would that will slim down the population and make them healthy. Introducing, by the way, new foods, because if you look at the pictures, very few of these are actually local foods, apart from taro leaves. There's no oranges, no milk, no bread, and apples. That kind of papaya usually is fed to the pigs, rice. So there's no attention to to the local staples, and again this reiteration of educating people to eat and another campaign is that of the weight loss competition, uh, encouraging people to lose weight, but then what occurs is that people loses weight to win the money, and then they throw a big feast and they redistribute the resources and gain all the way back. They obviously don't do it because of health, which is again mo'uilele, a word that was introduced, a Western word, or try to convey ideas or organize Western vegetable gardens in the back of the house. But that's and a responsibility is given to women in order to empower them. But that usually, that of gardening, is a male responsibility. And so it creates some very strong tensions within the family. Another way to say that I find these public health policies, which very poor, lacking, and misjudging and not addressing the main issue, which is that of the political choices related to food importation, to food dependency from the West or outer areas away from the local. I will stop here because my time is over. Thank you very much.